It is important to note in this journey of strategy that our research indicates most strategies fail, and they fail not because they're not clever or correct. They fail because they're not executed. In other words, the broken part of strategy isn't coming up with a strategy, it's making sure the organization can actually act on it and does act on it. Some recent research out of Harvard indicates that for the average strategy, we achieve only about 63% of the value potential that's in that strategy. The lost potential comes from things that are experienced both in the public sector and the private sector. Things like inadequate resources, not having the strategy properly communicated so that all the stakeholders understand it, not having the actions clearly aligned to the strategy or clearly defined, unclear accountabilities, and so forth. These are all things which are not private sector dependent, but equally contribute to the lack of performance that we see. Now, the concept is this. The idea that strategy stands separate from the rest of the organization is a bit like the old parable of the 8 blind people and the elephant. That story says that, depending on what part of the elephant you're hanging on to, you might think that the part you're hanging on to is something different. If you have the tail, you might think you have a rope. If you're hanging onto a leg, maybe you think it's a tree. The side, it's a wall. The ear might be a drape or a piece of leather, and so forth. The idea here is, depending what part of the elephant or strategy you're hanging on to, it may seem different. But in truth, it's all part of the same thing. It merely gets translated differently based on what part of the organization you're in, whether you're in the back office or front office. The purpose of this seminar is to begin to show you how you can connect these things with methodologies and tools and resources that already exist in your organization. If you think about it this way, conceptually, strategy is produced by the senior team in an organization, and in theory gets passed down to say the back office. And in theory, the back office's performance gets reported back up to the strategy people to help us refine those strategic objectives. Likewise, the strategy gets passed down to people at the front line, and their feedback also goes back up to the strategy office. And if you're lucky, maybe even the front line and back office talk to each other about the strategy and their ability to execute against it. That's the 8 blind people and the elephant story. What we'll be describing in this webinar is how it is we can begin to dissolve those bridges and make it into an integrated model where the strategy seamlessly flows from back office to front office and through all three back and forth. That provides us with the agility in the organizations to move ahead quickly. The approach I'm going to describe to you is simple and straightforward. In fact, in most organizations, we complete the work inside of 5 days in a single workshop. The example I'm going to be using during this webinar, in fact, there are 3. One from the Ministry of Community and Social Services here in Ontario, a second from the region of Peel, again here in Ontario, and a third one from the Los Angeles Social Services Group. It's important to note that the concepts I'm sharing with you here and the ideas are only based on publicly available information. There is no privately information that we gain during this work that we're sharing with you, nor do any of the performance figures reflect actual performance in any of these areas. So within the Ministry of Community and Social Services, there's no shortage of source documents that documented aspects of the strategy. In fact, in social services, if we added up the strategic objectives and imperatives, there are over 240 contained across the various documents. In fact, there are so many that it became confusing to the employees to sort out which things they should pay attention to and to what degree. Now, in fairness, many of these were restatements of the same thing, just in slightly different words. In some cases, they're redefined differently for different stakeholders and audiences that had a different take on each of those objectives. So the first step was to work with a senior leadership team for about 5 hours and shake out of these documents which were the key objectives that transcended all those. And we built what we call a strategy map. In a strategy map, we try to identify the objectives in 4 perspectives or swim lanes. And there's sort of a cause and effect relationship. In the public sector, our overall goal is to keep our stakeholders happy. The stakeholders are people like the taxpayers, the users of our services, other regulators, bond organizations, and so forth. A very complex stakeholder environment, all of whom want something different from your organization. To keep them happy, we better build the right internal processes. Those processes and projects will make the stakeholders happy if we understand their needs correctly and build our processes in alignment with those needs. But to build and maintain those internal processes, we need the right enablers, the right competencies, culture, enabling structures to make it happen. And then underpinning all of that, we need the right finances, the right budget to make it happen. So we should be able to take that existing budget and strategy documents and frisk it for the key aspects of what our objectives are. So, for example, overall, the mission statement for this particular area is about building resilience amongst Ontarians who have limited or threatened social and economic opportunities. Now, to do that, it identifies three core things. We have to enable economic well-being, social well-being, and of course, customer service excellence. Within the strategy map, we would draw it like this. We would say, overall, our internal processes need to deliver customer service excellence. To do that, there are two things we need to do. First, we need to make sure that we're able to deliver economic well-being, and secondly, social well-being. And if we do these two things for our stakeholders, we will contribute to our overall mission. So how do we create that customer service excellence? Well, there's another document out there that describes things like our commitment to community partners. So that's one of the things we need to do. We need to commit to our community partners, our private and public sectors, who work with us in tandem to deliver that customer service excellence. It also describes things like our obligations to accessibility and so forth. So we better begin rolling out those accessibility standards. There's details about modernizing our business processes and also developing a new case management system. So on the enablers, we need to modernize our business processes. And if we do that, that will both enable our ability to commit to the community partners and underpin our community service excellence. And it describes our need to update our case management system and supporting technology, which will both enable us to support and roll out these accessibility standards, and secondly, deliver the customer service excellence. Underpinning this, it talks about that high-performing, well-trained and diverse workforce. So if we have that high-performing, well-trained, diverse workforce, it will enable both modernizing business processes and updating the case management system. And then finally, of course, it talks about prudence and economy in our spending decisions. So this becomes a strategy map. Now, again, this is illustrative only, but what you understand is we don't need to create anything new. Your organization has already spent enough time thinking through its strategic objectives and spent considerable time debating the importance of these and getting the leadership team and stakeholders aligned around those objectives. Don't reinvent the wheel. We just have to harvest from that work you've already done.